Good morning, everyone. 10 o'clock comes quick sometimes, doesn't it? We have a great group of people here. Thank you all for joining us. I'm sure it is because of the hot topics in capital improvement and funding. I believe we have a quorum. We have a couple of board members that may have to bow out early. I think I saw Marianne, and yeah, there's Marianne's in there too. So perfect. So we have a quorum. So on that, I will call the meeting to order. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved, David.
Thank you, David. Do I have a second?
Marianne, second.
Thank you, Marianne. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm guessing there's lots of silent ayes in that one with it. So on that, let's go ahead and move on to the discussion of Halloween and celebration in the CCDD. Gosh, it's all blending together. I think it was Monday. On Monday, we had the joint meeting between CCDD, Osceola County, and CROA. During that meeting, the conversation of Halloween was discussed. CCDD during that meeting voted to send to CROA that they would like to close off the streets and only allowed access to residents through resident ID. And that's for Halloween evening. And again, that's a Saturday. And that was the reason, part of it was just the expectation of a large volume of people coming from outside of residence. So I will open this up to the board for a conversation.
To clarify, what we talked about on the meeting was putting sheriff's deputies at the entrance points to celebration, which would be out on World Drive, quite possibly would be off of 192 there somewhere. So basically we've got 3 checkpoints, and the only way to get into the city is, or into celebration, is to have a celebration ID. The genesis of it was thousands of people show up on a Saturday for Halloween anyway, and it was a Saturday. So, you know, social distancing is not going to happen if celebration is open. So is it open or not? CDD was clearly no. They were looking for the board leaning, and the board members who were present on that meeting said no, but they wanted us to affirm it, which is what we would be doing here this morning with a motion.
And they would like to send actually the county specifically requested that it be a joint request from CCDD and CROA to the county making the request. David, you're on the call also. Would you like to chime in? You're muted.
There's actually a couple of things here. The discussion with CDD was about getting approval for sheriff's deputies to close off the town, celebration resident access only. So that was one issue. And I just want to make sure we talk about the other issue that came from Special Events Committee from a meeting a month ago, and then more recently this week, which was really for us to discuss not allowing or not endorsing, or however we want to take it, internal trick-or-treating that night, just from the same safety perspective. But I know, but for the CDD perspective, it's all about non-access to the community except for residents for that evening, that afternoon. That would be that afternoon and evening. There was not a time set, but it was just the concept of residents only for Halloween afternoon, evening. Really from a safety, we're talking about health and safety, frankly, with thousands of visitors.
Thank you, David. I think for the purpose of this meeting, because originally this was supposed to be only a discussion on budget 2021. However, because the CCDD put this forward and we needed to get the information to the county as soon as possible to allow advanced planning for them, I would like to, obviously the Special Events Committee needs to know what's going on, obviously, so does JR, and how the board wants to move forward with it. I think today, if the board will indulge me, if we can just make it specific to what the request is for the CCDD, so we can move on to the next agenda item. Is that reasonable, or is that not okay?
I think that's very reasonable, because we can have the Halloween conversation in a week or two as regards special events and how we want to do it in town. So I would make a motion that we endorse a joint request by CCDD and CROA to the county to have sheriff's deputies and officers at the entrance points to celebration at a time to be determined for Halloween, and that only residents with resident IDs be allowed to enter.
Can we also make sure that the one thing that was addressed was Spring Lake community? How can we safely do that? So we just want to make sure that we include all of Celebration. Since the last time we've closed off the area, it has not been since we had the new development on Celebration Boulevard. So whoever the liaison is for CCDD, maybe work with, I think it's David and, or it's Brian and Kevin, right? I believe are the two CCDD coordinators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
So, yeah, so if we could just coordinate and make sure that we don't forget to include that and that. Do I have a second for Brian's motion?
Mary Ann, I'll second.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Before I open it up to the community, do I have any further conversation or questions from the board?
Vanessa, this is Diana.
Go ahead, Diana.
My only question is going to be, how are we going to publicize that we're not going to be open? And I know that's part of the future discussion past this motion, but it really concerns me the amount of people that will be trying to get in and not be able to. And then that will back it up even more. So we need to address that fully at some point.
We talked about that at the meeting, and the reason that both the county, CDD, and us wanted to make this decision now is we want to start advertising in September that Celebration will not be open for Halloween. So probably put it on notices, put it on boards, put it in everywhere that people might read so that it gets out there.
Okay, that makes me feel better. Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I
And
think,
to the question that's on the chat also about, people parking and walking down, I think that unfortunately we're going to have the sheriff's department's going to have to help with that too. That's going to be, you can only do so much. It's going to be hard. It is it's still open to the public. I mean, we can't close down. So we can do as reasonable effort as possible. I think that there's going to be a reality that we're going to have some issues, but we need to make sure as a board and the CCDD and a county, we work together to make sure we minimize and avert risk as much as possible. Any other board comments?
a couple of things. The discussion today, what we'll be voting on is working jointly with CDD to request sheriff's presence. As part of that, I think we need to specify our thinking in terms of the timing. I mean, we're not dealing with, I hope we're not just dealing with 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. whenever things get dark. I hope we're talking earlier. So there's an issue of timings. Second is to the point of communication. I would wait to do any communication until we resolve how we want to handle this internally. So we have one set of communication that says whatever our whole package is. Otherwise it gets piecemeal and someone will read one part and then they don't see the other part. Let's put it all together once we decide yay or nay, however we want to handle it internally. And then we can go from there. But I think widespread communication it will be important.
But probably we got time for that because people are going to worry about Halloween in the middle of October, and that's when we need heavy communication is 3 weeks ahead of the actual date.
Yeah, and should we choose to not do it, people who are stocking up with 1,000 pieces of candy may be doing that in September. So whenever we make a decision, we get that, whatever the decision is, we get that out. But I think we should part of this is what is the timing for when would we want sheriff's deputy there? So I just think we need some fluidity so that we're at the front end of when people start to show up from the outside.
Thank you. So any other board comment, and I will open it up to the public in a moment. Is there any other board comment? Okay, so we have a motion and a second, which is just to agree with CCDD and work together with them. On that note, I would like to try and keep this as simple as possible, but would like to acknowledge that if there was any resident comment beyond what has already been stated and it's specific to this particular motion, that way we can continue on with the big agenda items. Any comments from the public at this point in time? David's going to be my timekeeper. Keep it to 3 minutes. If you have any, if you don't, I'm good with that. Board, any other residents?
I don't see any.
This is Dory. Can I speak?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Hello. Yes.
You're good.
Hi. Okay. Hang on a second. Basically, I just wanted to reiterate the Special Events Committee did vote unanimously of canceling all door-to-door trick-or-treating in its entirety. Basically, the lifestyle team, JR, and the committee has been working to establish strict guidelines for fall events, and 2 were totally reconfigured to allow for safe family fun. And all fall events basically were based on the CDC guidelines for community events and gatherings. And the board has gone through, we know, exhausting process regarding facilities reopening fall events and regarding safety, and perhaps the same process should apply here. Because for one thing, the thought of the conversation of having just celebration residents, that trying to monitor resident only coming in town could also be a very scary ordeal, for we really can't prohibit people coming in to have dinner at Columbia or a town tavern and traditional joint family gatherings with neighbors from outside. And we were just saying that based on the safety concerns that we had for fall events, the act of handing out candy would be almost impossible at a 6-foot social distancing between both children and adults who trick or treat. Sidewalk width is normally 5 feet, which also makes social distancing impossible for all trick-or-treaters in our neighborhoods, even if it's just for our residents. So, the thought of hundreds or thousands of trick-or-treaters knocking on doors, coming face to face with some of our most vulnerable population that night is scary as heck, but for different reasons. So, but I do think that regardless if your decision is to have police presence in town, the sheriff department is still important, because even if we have an abundance of signage outside of our community, still reaching those who don't usually come here, go down 192, won't see it. So we would still have to say, if we canceled it in its entirety, we would still have to have some sort of presence. But I just wanted to throw that out because that's a little bit of a hook into what you're voting on right now. So I just thought I thought it was important to state that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dory. Go ahead, Brian.
Dory, we specifically spoke about that the other day when we had the meeting with CDD and the county, because we said we don't know what Lexington has planned. We certainly don't know what the downtown restaurants have planned. The reason CDD voted the other day and we said we would vote today is because then it's got to be communicated to the impacted parties, and then that provides them a chance to decide how they're going to tailor their business plans. So 100% agree with you.
Thank you, Brian. And just to clarify, it's very possible that Osceola County can cancel Halloween. I mean, it's still a very real possibility. So we just don't know. But to everybody's point, we needed to make sure that we stayed ahead of it and we need to set the pace and set the standard. And regardless, thank you. Go ahead.
Regardless, you do need to. Regardless of what is decided, I do agree that the sheriff's presence is going to be necessary. Whether you cancel it or you don't cancel it, there'll still be people that may not know and try to come in.
Absolutely, and I think, I mean, for those that aren't aware, I mean, we don't participate. We're in Main Village. We don't participate. We actually, even though we turn off our lights, we still have to put caution tape across the front of our porch, because regardless of whether or not you want to participate, people will still come up on your front porch. So we actually have to block off our front porch to prevent it. And then we go out to them if we want to do trick-or-treating. That way that we're not committed to it. So I think there'll be something that it's going to be due diligence of each resident as to whether or not they want to participate. We can only control as a board so much, and as a
Correct.
CPDD and a county. So thank you very much. Dory, anything else?
No, just that there will be a alternative event on October 22nd, and more details to come through Lifestyle and special events. There will be an event, the Spooky Hollow at the CCFC.
Perfect. Yes, thank you very much. And we already voted to approve that last time. Thank you so much. And thank you to the committee for all of that and thinking ahead on what they would like to do with Halloween. Board comment or any more public comment? Okay, then yep, I was going to say that we already have the motion in a second. Brian, yes or no?
Yes.
David, yes or no? I think that was a yes.
Yes.
Diana, yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Mary Ann, yes or no?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. I don't believe Kevin's on our call. Is that correct? I don't see him on here. Okay, I just want to make sure that we did miss him. Okay, so the motion passes. So JR and Brian, start working with the county and figure things out, and just make sure that everybody's included as much as possible, and communication out appropriately. On that, let's go ahead and move on to the budget 2021. Brian, this was something that you have been working with your finance committee. We have our budgeting is going to be voted on in October to be placed before the residents. This has been a long process. You and the finance committee have been working diligently to try and get things done, but you need some answers from the board. So do you want me to start, or do you want to start?
Why don't, since for the sake of the public, I have written a 2-page document which the board has seen and studied, and we've been trading emails, and then Vanessa traded an email about how she was thinking about proceeding. I think it would be good to start with Vanessa packaging the thing on her last email, and then I think we have the big picture conversation, and I'm happy with that approach.
Board, are you good with that? I see head nods. Okay, so here's where some of my emails are, most specifically my most recent email in with regards to this, basically is we wanted to go full steam ahead as a board with our plans. And then on March 16th, the board voted to shut everything down because we were in the middle of a pandemic. It's 6 months later, and we still have lots of unknown. We don't know. We're hoping that everything will be okay, but we don't know. The implications of joblessness in our community is a real thing. We have residents and owners that aren't able to go back to work. Our assessments are due no matter what. So they may be delayed. Eventually we'll get them unless there's a foreclosure situation. But assessments are not waivable by the board. If you're an owner, you have to pay assessments. So the money will come eventually, barring any unforeseen foreclosure, which you never know what's going to happen. We all lived through 2008, which was not a good time. This unemployment rate is much higher than that. I believe that our fiduciary responsibility can't be overlooked in this critical time. We, as a board, must make sure that we do not do any non-reversible expenses for our amenities. So I am of the belief that, and this is not to say we don't want to do our due diligence on moving forward with these, but I think we need to have a hard freeze on our capital expenditures, capital improvement funds above and beyond your routine reserves and maintenance of what we already have in our amenities. So I think there should be a hard freeze. Brian and I discussed this a little bit. I think it's reasonable to say through June 30th, 2021. That gives the new board time to come in. It gives us time to find out where the delay is in our assessments. The capital improvement fund, we have, as a board, have voted on to use only for capital improvements However, with the vote of a board, we can actually use that as our daily expenses if we have to. So that is our, that's my biggest concern. I'll open that. Would you like me to make the motion to freeze, or do you want to have the discussion first, Brian?
Make your motion, I guess.
Okay, so I am motioning to freeze capital expenditures through June 30th, 2021, beyond reserves and necessary improvements for our current amenities. And Mary Ann said she motioned the second, motion and second prior to discussion. Is that what you're saying, Mary Ann? Yes, that's my plan.
That's late because you already answered yourself.
Okay. So do I have a second for that?
I'll second that. This is David.
Thank you, David. Okay, now I'll open it up for the board to conversation, and then after the board discusses it, I'll open it up for community conversation.
Just one clarification for the community. I know often words are confusing and budget titles are confusing. When we're talking about capital improvement, we're talking about things like the CCFC was a capital improvement. It's something that didn't exist and now we want it to exist. The dog park was a capital improvement. So that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about replacing the air conditioning or adding air conditioning. We're talking about something new. Is that a fair, Brian, would that be a fair statement?
That's pretty darn fair. Close enough.
For a non-financial specialist, thank you very much.
And I'm trying to spell this out clearly for the public because I know there's interest in this one. So today we got in, and I'm going to use broad numbers. Today we got $850,000 in the capital improvement fund. We know that we owe CDD about $250,000 in October for road work that was done out on the CCFC. So that'll put us down to about 600. When Vanessa talks about a freeze, we still have home sales going on. We still have park or apartment recreation fees and that which would go in there. It will continue to build up for a period of time through, she said June 30, July 1 of next year, at which point there will be a $1.1 million in there or some number like that. And so that's what Vanessa is really talking about here, is letting it build up in aggregate until we come out the back end of this and say, where are we realistically? And from a budget perspective, I'll talk about my paper here in a little bit. I mean, we're still very much up in the air about, okay, what's happening with Island Village and in what time frame. And so it creates uncertainty.
Yeah, the other thing.
So, go ahead, Dave. I was going to say, go ahead, David.
Yeah, a couple other points on that. Just the dollar figure, you know, we have limited dollars. And, you know, when you talk about where we will be after we pay the CDD for the road, and then what it grows to, and then what we've already thought might be easy wins, what we thought a year ago might be easy wins with pickleball or with lawn sports. Turns out it was much more expensive than that. Also, as we go back to the guiding principles we adopted for the facilities master plan, one of our principles, number 6, was we want to allocate funding on a pay-as-you-go basis. So pay-as-you-go means we got to have the money in the bank. So part of what this proposal does, Vanessa's proposal, the motion, is let's build up our amount. One of the rationales is build up the amount so we can pay for some of these things. Because we don't have much to pay for. The other part that I heard in the rationale is we're not sure what the financial status is going to be, and we might need this funding for other purposes because of, you know, financial concerns with cash coming in based on residents, homeowners, financial concerns. Even though that money will be coming eventually, there may be some delays in that. So it's a cautious approach. It seems to me it's an appropriate approach. It doesn't mean we don't discuss these things, because you know, we can still discuss, but we can't spend. We're basically calling a hold on that for the next 11 months.
This is Mary Ann, and I'm very much in support of this idea, because I think our fiduciary responsibility is probably the most important thing that we have on our plate. And I will tell you that a freeze on capital improvements that are not already, we're not already underway, is what we're doing at my corporation and at the other HOA that I'm involved with, where my vacation home is located. Because proceeding with a mindset of conservancy and prudence at this juncture with so many uncertainties ahead, particularly with regard to the economy, it is the appropriate action, because we don't have a magic 8-ball, and I think that we need to be wise and conservative. So I am very much in support of what is being proposed here.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Diana, I know you're trying to multitask. Do you have anything you want to ask?
Yeah, I do. I would just, I think we're doing the completely correct thing by putting this on hold. It's the right thing to do until we know more about our current situation. And so I agree with what everyone else has said. So thank you.
Go ahead, Brian.
The one point I want to add that we haven't said yet, and we will go through the 2-pager here in a minute, is I don't think we as a board, and I know coming out of the facilities plan that we did last year, talked about truly what should be our priorities and how should we attack this. So Vanessa and I had a good long conversation yesterday about how the freeze could make a lot of sense, but we need to do a lot of work between now and July 1 of next year to say how in the heck will we be ready to proceed then. This buys us time to do a proper job, but there's a lot of homework that needs to be done to get ready for next July 1, I believe.
So I still want to make sure that I don't think I've seen Kevin come back in. Before I moved on from the board, I don't believe Kevin's popped in, correct? No, okay. Is there any comments from the public? And again, 3 minutes at the most, and David will be my timekeeper. Please raise your hand, or you can do it on the on your dashboard. You can raise your hand. Comments? Should be able to unmute yourself if you can. Going, gone. Okay. Then we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion, or call the vote?
Call the vote.
Okay, Brian, you're muted. Yes or no? Thank you. David?
Yes.
Mary Ann?
Yes.
Diana?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay, thank you all. Now that said, just because we are freezing until next year does not mean that we do not discuss the topics. So Brian, I know the other thing that you wanted from the board was a feeling on Stetson. Do you want to cover that on the bottom, or do you want to cover it at the front?
I want to go through this paper here real quick and walk people through, because there are people in the community listening, so I'd like them to hear the big picture. We are doing the budget process, and I'm going to give you the highlights of what's laid out here. So at the top, we actually have to do a 3-year budget. In doing this 3-year budget, the Finance Committee, which is new now and met 3 times, is going to be actively involved. We are going to put together a capital commitment roll forward of the funds that we think will be created, including the impacts of Island Village, and we're actually talking with Island Village people this afternoon, so that we can see how funds aggregate. We issued the Parks and Facilities Plan last fall. David and I were speakers at that and heavily involved. When you look at priorities 1 through 12 here on the page that's on the screen, these were actually the weighted average results, which has got a performing arts center first, a community center, then adult active senior center, parking, an indoor gym, Artisan Park amphitheater restroom, East Park Crescent restroom, pickleball courts, shuffleball courts, a playground in Artisan Park, bocce ball courts, croquet courts. A quite diverse group. And here in the paper that I laid out here, and I'm just going to walk you through the big picture, and Stetson's actually the last item on here. Here's what I believe the board needs to attack. And this is not a
1 week or a 1 month project. I actually think done properly, this will take a few months to do it, which is why I don't really mind a freeze until July 1, because I think we've got several months of work here. But if you bounce down, whoever's running the screen, to the stuff at the bottom of this page. So here's kind of like questions I would like us to address. For instance, we've got large and very expensive items up above, like the community center. A community center could cost anywhere from $4 million to $12 million. That's a lot of money. We've got smaller, cheaper, and more definable type things like croquet courts. And then we've got something that's complex and expensive, like a parking garage. If you were going to solve a parking garage, where in the heck would you put it? You'd have to get the county, CCD, and a whole bunch of people involved. So that becomes complex. So it's almost like it would be smart for us to actually break it into 3 groups so we can kind of identify what it is we're really looking at. And then what I think we need to do is we need to go through and then how should the priority be defined? And I'm under B1 there. You know, we've never defined what a community center is. And in number 2, you know, can we combine things? Could the active adult senior center and the indoor gym and game courts be combined into the community center? You know, and to actually do this definitional type thing, I'm not sure the board should make that decision. I think maybe we should actually get the community involved in defining what a community center might even mean. You know, you look at something like number 2 up there, I think it was a performing arts center, if I remember right. There, and you can bounce, number 1 was performing arts center, sorry. So if you bounce down on the page, whoever's running it, you know, I think we need to ask ourselves some business questions here, like, what do we really need with a performing arts center? Could we take Lakeside, redo the stage so that it's an outdoor performing area that would be very nice and very usable 8 months a year? We all know it's hotter than the devil in the summer. You know, you could talk about the AMC Theater there. It'll be coming up. I think the lease runs out in 2021. And, you know, with item 4 there, you know, we really need to consider these things within the scope of what else is available. You know, when you talk about, especially something like a performing arts center, we got Margaritaville, we got Epcot Concerts, we got Disney Springs. There's an awful lot of alternatives here. How would we really use a performing arts center? And the board knows my opinion on this one strongly. You know, we built the athletic fields out there and found out that we're subsidizing to the tune of about $350,000 a year. I'm not going to be a fan of building anything on here that that's going to keep costing us $350,000, $400,000 a year to operate. So we, you know, are going to have to ask some hard questions. And that's why I'm saying this is a several-month project in my mind. You know, I think we have to, with number 5 here, how valuable is the item to owners, including Island Village owners? Island Village is going through a lot of change right now, and it's still being defined. They may not even have a downtown, so how would our downtown be used for that? Rough cost estimates, I talked about that. And how much risk is there in executing a priority? I think we really ought to talk about that. We learned a lot with CFC in the athletic fields, and something that was going to cost $2.6 million costing $4.8 million with all the other stuff that wasn't included in the operating costs. So we need to do a better job at defining risk, and then who all the stakeholders are. I'll go down C. We had talked earlier this year about pickleball courts on Lot B and some stuff like that. And then we learned that Lot B and Lot D on the Civic Corridor have very poor drainage, that the drainage ditches were not properly built to handle the drainage, and that the retaining ponds were not adequate. And what we was hoping was going to cost $200,000-300,000 got us an estimate of $1.3 to $1.4 million, because it was going to cost us almost $800,000 to just redo all the drainage, the ditches, the retention ponds, and everything. So I think we got a project at the board level, whether we like it or not, to do a thorough evaluation of both Lot B and Lot D. And is it going to cost us $1 million to make that land usable for further things? And we don't, there's no one who knows the answer to that question, honestly. We have not done enough work. We just got enough information to scare us to death. But $1 million is a lot of money. But to use them, we'd have to do that. On item D, asking a very specific question.
with two items being both the dog park and the athletic fields, we built Taj Mahals. Should we be changing our building approach so that we go to a much more focused on satisfying basic functional needs and have more moderate costs so that we can do more things? E, we've already dealt with the thing. We have not dealt with F either. Are we willing to consider debt as a financing alternative? I know one board member has said that that board member hates the concept of debt. I'm not against debt myself personally, as long as it's thought about properly. But we need to ask that question and get an answer to that question. Is rent debt? I know we have a board member who doesn't believe we should rent stuff, you know, but would we rent space for small items? And when we get to Stetson, I'm going to talk about it in much more thing. You know, and then basically when we get those answers, the board needs to go through and then say, how are we really going to prioritize that? And then you go to item I, which is Stetson. I've said this before, I'll kind of go through it again. And I think the board needs to discuss Stetson specifically this morning. Stetson was purchased by new investors in late January, early February of this year. They had a wonderful business plan and ran right into COVID, and business models have radically changed. If Stetson were to become available to us to rent, which we know it is available, let's say we got it at a price we would like, or if it were to become available to purchase, would we consider that? And if we would consider that, this is one of those things where you have to react with timing, and the timing could be sooner rather than later. And by sooner, I mean, you know, maybe it's January of 2021, which is outside of the motion that Vanessa made. But, you know, if opportunity were to knock and they would say, we'll sell it to you for $100, well, would we buy it for $100? That's a stupid amount, but I'm trying to draw behind the point. If we were to say we want to at least be willing to consider it, and if you're going to get it, I think my personal belief is then you'd have to move town hall there. It's an ideal location in a lot of ways. And you could take something like the 851 building, turn it into a community center. And we know that long term, we have the ability to build on top of the 851 building and to build outside of the 851 building. And you could do that in 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, because you would have the flexibility of already owning it and stuff like that. If we're serious about the potential of considering the 851 as a community center, then we got to solve the town hall question. And if we're serious about considering Stetson as a town hall, then we have to start a project that actually has us defining what might a community center look like now or later, and would Stetson actually work and what would go there. And to me, see, so I'm really asking two questions. We've made a decision to freeze to July 1, which I support for a lot of reasons. I think we need to do the work that is laid out in this paper, or we can change it, or if I'd love feedback from the board. And we need to make a decision about whether we're willing to consider Stetson. If we are, then I think we're forced into a situation where we need to start doing an evaluation, because we don't want them to come back to us and say, we need to know what you think on December 11th, and we've spent no time getting ready. So if we're going to consider it, we need to make that decision now and start setting up an evaluation process, so at least we can consider it. And now I'll open it up for comments from the board.
Thank you, Brian. I'll open this up. David, Marianne?
I'm happy to jump in.
Okay.
I think the board has seen my comments. I hope you've gotten my comments. So just to make sure that that was seen.
Yes, but I wanted to
okay.
provide an opportunity for everything to be discussed out in the open.
Yeah. Okay, good. So there's some fine tuning, but at the largest level, I think this is great. We're having this discussion, and if we look at the what really came out of the needs assessment was the whole idea of community center broadly defined. I mean, and Brian has said the piece is, you know, performing arts, or might an indoor game courts be part of that, whatever. So at the very highest level, I like the idea of buckets. However, I would propose 2 buckets. and that would be, I would take parking off. I think the largest question for us, CROA as an HOA, what is appropriate for us, for our community? And then to me, the parking issue, while that comes out as a high level item by our residents, is that really appropriate for us if we're thinking about expenditures, you know? So for me, I'd like to really focus on the whole community, active adult, performing arts, that whole package of what a community center is. Second, as we get into the discussion of whether it's Stetson 851, but it's the larger question of community center, and I think Brian's right, is it's not just the board, but getting into the community. What is essential in a community center? What is strongly desired? What's highly desired? What's desired? And what would be on our dream list? As Brian pointed out, when we did the CCFC, we really did a top quality facility. The only thing we did not do is put artificial grass on the other two fields, which was discussed 4 years ago. But it was $800K add-on per field, we decided no. So it's what is it, those elements that we really want in a community center? To me, the old mantra, form follows function. So what are the functions that we want to serve? I mean, what is it that we want that facility to do? And start moving on that. I think Stetson is a piece of that, 851, those are our two main assets. But to me, the large question is what's appropriate for the HOA? And I would just, even though parking bubbles up, that may be something we advocate for and help promote, but to spend our time on parking when we have so many needs, large and small, that's why I'm proposing 2 buckets. It makes it a little simpler for us. And then getting engaged in discussions about what is it that we want in a community center. I know we asked that in one of the community surveys we did maybe 3 years ago. That's dated now, but so I know we started that discussion with, you know, what does the community want? But let's engage in this discussion now. What should be in a community center / active adult center / performing arts?
Thank you, David. Is there anything else? I don't want to interrupt if you're.
No, that's
okay. Perfect. Okay.
I mean, I also want to, you know, we came up with guiding principles, and when we had the report from Lowe's Design, we came up with 15 guiding principles. So I just hope that gets appended so we don't forget that we did discuss those, and we said to extent possible, pay as you go. But we also said, as part of our guiding principles, CROA does not have to do everything, because we're part of a larger community, Osceola County, Central Florida. So we don't have to do everything here. And so I think Brian's point, as we look at the idea of performing arts, maybe our part of performing arts isn't, you know, it's not like the Dr. Phillips Center, but our part of performing arts is we'll do performing arts, but it's going to be in an outdoor arena, like the lakeside piece. But let's have that discussion. We don't have to do everything here. That was one of our guiding principles.
Agreed. Thank you, David. I do think it's important that I think it's important. The guiding principles is something that I think that we should reiterate whenever we're discussing our capital improvements.
It just anchors us. It just anchors us.
Yep. Mary Ann, I know you had to step away. Are you back in? Or do you want me to go on and then get back to you in a minute?
I see her on mute.
Yeah, no, I'm going to keep her on mute because I don't know. She said she had to step away. So,
she may have.
So I'm going to leave her alone. So yeah. That's okay. So I'll just I'll say my piece really quick. I think this is a perfect opportunity for us to, as a board, to work with our committees to determine what it looks like, right? What is a performing arts center? What is a community center? Active senior, how can that be incorporated? We've discussed before at the 851 building, right? Do we add on to the 851 building and then add a second level? Those are all options that we can do. Over in Lakeside, adding that outdoor pavilion, adding on there so we can have an outdoor entertainment pavilion. We can also elevate up on the Jones room, right? We can build up a second level. So there are lots of opportunities for us to do things without the Stetson building.
Right.
However, we need some place to put, if we're going to do those, if our current areas are going to be where we do our community things, so our dance, our concerts, anything like that, then we need a place for our management to go, right? A go-to place for problem solving for our community members. Right. Would that be at the 851 building still, or would we want to do something over at Stetson? So I think that's a very valid question as we problem solve what our community needs within these lists. I do not want to forget that we did due diligence and we were almost ready to start voting for pickleball and bocce courts and croquet courts and playgrounds. There were lots of things that we were already ready to jump on. I don't want to lose sight of those things. So what I'm wondering, hopefully we'll be able to, our house sales and things like that won't be impacted. So at the end of the time, we'll have more money to be able to do more things quicker. Go ahead, Brian.
And I hear your points, and I just want to add to this, just so people understand the big picture here, because I talked about Lot B and D, and if it cost us $1 million to fix all the drainage issues and stuff like that, and then if we could solve pickleball and all this other stuff, you can easily spend a couple of $1 million, even if we call them smaller projects. If we decide we're going down a community center type approach, I suspect the cheapest approach, even at 851, is still $4 million. If we were to rent Stetson, I think we'd have to take working capital dollars and use them for rent. And what's it cost to rent Stetson? I don't know. Let's guess 150, 200,000, or if you bought it for 3.5 million. I mean, I don't know the facts, but these become absolute decisions when you go down a path. And part of it here is really getting people comfortable. We can say we want to blow off the community center for 7 or 8 years and solve the smaller projects as David defined them. I don't care. It just forces us into decisions.
Yeah, I think all of this is great discussion, and it's moving us down some paths. So two very different thoughts. One is, and I know we looked at croquet over at East Park. By the baseball course, East Village pool and baseball course there. So I know we looked at that, and that price was higher than we thought. I would encourage us, again, looking out any other facilities we might have where that might go. I put that in my notes on this. So it's scoping out any other potential location where it might be cheaper. So looking at that. And then the other thing is to not forget, and this was item 13 from our guiding principles, partners. When we talk about Stetson, we did talk about, when we were looking at that, there was discussion with the Celebration Foundation, but are there other partners as we go down some of these paths, whether it's Stetson, 851, or other things, potential partners. We had discussions over the years with the county. Again, what is in the best interest of us as CROA and our residents, and might there be partners that help to reduce some of our costs and our own financial obligations, but also achieves it so it's a win-win.
Thank you, David. Marianne, I see you're back. Is now a good time to chime in?
Yes, though I feel like I missed most of the discussion, so I don't want to be repetitive, so I'm a little hesitant, but I was listening to what I was able to get back in time to listen to what David was saying and the end of what Brian was saying. And the part of this that piques my interest the most, I think this will be, if we do this right, this won't be a one meeting wonder kind of a discussion, right? So
right.
the idea that there will be potential partners to offset costs of things in the future, particularly in the rapidly changing economic climate, is a very interesting idea. I think we're going to find that there will be, particularly with certain amenities like pickleball and things like that. I am very interested in a performing arts / community center, but like Brian, I think the idea of what might happen with Stetson can change what that looks like, how we package it financially. I do have a question, and I apologize if I'm asking something that was already answered. Do we have any idea when we might know what might be happening and what rental opportunities or what might be available at Stetson with any kind of surety?
Go ahead, Brian.
We included myself, David, Von Roberts when he was on the board, and Mike Jackson representing Celebration Foundation, met with Stetson a couple of times, and Steve Waring was also present.
Right.
Going back to early this year, we walked the space and stuff like that.
With the new owners,
Yeah, I remember that, but I'm wondering with code, what has maybe.
Yeah, and I'm gonna get there. I'm being repetitive, just helping the audience catch up.
True.
So
Thank
we
you.
met with them. At that point in time, they were wanting to lease the whole building or whole floors, and they were looking for a very nice return for the investors, and it was damned expensive. That's a technical term. And we knew we needed to wait because of the board elections coming up, and just we didn't have the board on board and all kinds of stuff like that. We have continued to have conversations, meaning that they have traded emails with me. That I know they've also traded emails with Mike Jackson in his role at the foundation. And, you know, just to see if there's continued interest. And we've always said there's continued interest in a conversation. We have been waiting because, and that's why you as a board have heard me all screaming for the last 3 or 4 months. Just, you know, I see all this prep work that we had to do. They don't have, to the best of my knowledge, based upon emails a couple of weeks ago, they don't have any renters right now. I'm sure they're looking for a core tenant. I believe COVID flipped the world upside down. That's a stupid statement, but when you own a town, when you own a building in the Celebration with no tenants in it and no parking, and the whole commercial real estate world is changing radically because of the pandemic. You know, we're probably a hero in shining armor, whether we rent it or ultimately, who knows, maybe they would be willing to sell it. I don't know. And, you know, time is probably important because, you know, as time passes, they'll find out what the real alternatives are. And if they can find a business that would take the whole thing, they're going to do that, and they should. I mean, they're investors. If it becomes clear in time that they come to us and say, we'd really like to have a serious conversation with you, then I think we need to be prepared. So that's what I keep trying to set up, is us being prepared. Because I think our worst case scenario of doing the work that's laid out here is, you know, what do we want for a community center? We need to do regardless of Stetson. How could we change the 851 building? We need to do that regardless of Stetson. I see Eileen Barr sent an email here. Yes, you don't have to take Town Hall to Stetson. You could take it somewhere else and still use the 851 as community center. So I think most of the work that we're talking about here is intelligent work, regardless of Stetson. And that's what I'm arguing for. It was from Jerry. I think just top.
Yeah, I would agree, Brian, that having our options laid out so that when the opportunity, whatever the appropriate opportunity is, presents itself, and hopefully it will be one that we've laid out in options, not one that came from left field, though it might be a great one that comes from left field. So I'm not in any way not supportive of having the conversations and getting this set up. I'm very interested in that might present itself as a really financially workable opportunity in the current situation. But and that's, since I did miss most of the other conversation, that's pretty much all I feel comfortable weighing in on right now. It's just kind of those thoughts.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mary Ann. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, so David talked about partners. I think the partner conversation has to be thought about totally differently. We did not choose to partner with the county when they wanted to do the stuff out of the CCFC because we didn't like the constraints and rules. We had a follow-up healing meeting afterwards when they said they'd be willing to talk with us about a civic corridor. No, I'm sorry, about a community center, but they wanted at least 3 to 4 years to pass, and that was from last fall. The pandemic has now happened, and I think county finances have been flipped upside down. So I put, because when I think about a partner who actually has money, the county, I think, is flipped upside down, and for us to hope that we are going to get the county to help us build or refurbish anything, I think realistically, we're talking 2025. You know, if we partner with the foundation, great. Celebration Foundation, great. And what that would look like would have to be defined. But, you know, when I think about material amounts of money, I'm thinking about the county, and I think it would not be wise for us to think that's going to happen in the near term because of the pandemic and everything else they're trying to just figure out how to get through with tourism reductions.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you, board. So just, I would like to point out it is 10:56. It's almost 11 o'clock. We've been doing this for an hour. I don't want to rush through anything, but I do want to point out it's been an hour. Brian, was there something specific you needed from the board regarding this, or was it more of a let's air this out, let's have the conversation, or do you need something from us?
Specifically, I mean, I'm hoping we have till 11:30. I would love to hear comments from the community. I want the board to say this 2-pager is either logical or it's stupid. And if it's stupid, then okay, how do we want to change it? And if we're going to proceed with this evaluation of a community center to think about Stetson, we need to start saying, how the heck are we going to do that? You know, are we going to have special events and recreation get heavily involved to define how we do a community center? How do we get things involved? I just don't want to have a meeting and then, okay, 2 months from now, let's have the same conversation, because the clock is ticking. And that's what I care about.
Totally agree. We don't need to belabor the issue. We definitely want to move forward.
Vanessa,
go ahead, David.
Vanessa, in answer to your question, I think it was you who suggested maybe we take some discussion points to commit to the committees. I mean, it can go to each committee. I mean, I know Dog Park would have a hard time weighing in on communities, particularly the community center piece, but maybe take it to the committees. There may be some focused questions and just ask for input. That helps to move that process forward.
What I don't want to do.
I agree. And
go ahead.
What I don't want to.
Go ahead, Brian.
What I don't want to do. All right, you go first. I'll go second.
So, in an effort to stop this nonsense, I think that I understand where you're coming from not necessarily the dog park, but I don't want to not consult the committees, regardless of what their mission is.
Right. That's fine. That's fine.
Because I think that that you can still, that's your way of engaging community members, because I'm sure that even if you have a dog, you'll still be interested in what's going on with your entertainment. So I think we have a resource and we have an avenue to get community engagement. I'd like to use those venues if we can. That's just my two pieces on that one. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, what I was going to say is the last thing I want to do is a survey, because the survey 2 or 3 years ago, or the Parks and Facilities Plan, really is a survey, and it is easy for people to say, I want a brand new BMW. I want this, I want that. I like using the committees because we've got people on these committees who also understand the way CROA works, our finances, or they're comfortable talking to somebody like me or you and saying, okay, how do we think about this? Because we need to come up with, if we're going to talk about a community center or 851 or some of this stuff, we need people who really understand the big picture. And, you know, people can call into a committee meeting if they want to, from a public perspective, but most people aren't going to participate anyway. So then we need to better define these with appropriate committees. So I like that idea.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to disparage the dog park committee as the liaison, as a dog owner and so forth. But I think Vanessa's point is a great one. These are engaged community members who do see more than whatever their committee responsibilities are. So, but I think helpful to the committees would be, and I don't know the answer here, but a series of questions, you know, some pointed questions. And so we ask them that. The other thing, which is more picayune and minor, is just to have other board members weigh in before a document gets shared, have others weigh in. I raised probably 20 questions in the draft document, and the larger ones I brought out here. But just as we revamp this to make it crisp for the larger community to look at, or the committees to look at, maybe we can weigh in, put some key questions at the end of this for committees to consider what we want them to weigh in on by a certain time. I think that helps. It helps move the conversation forward. And I agree. I go back to your point. As a person who's done hundreds of surveys, I don't think we need another survey. We have one dated, again, about what might community center look like. We have the more recent one. I think it's now, let's get down to some brass tacks. What are the functions that we want to see? What are the core elements that we want to see in whatever this community center concept, broadly defined, might be? And then there may be some thoughts from the committees about how to move forward. We have the two assets we have 851 as our asset. Stetson may or may not be available as an option. So we have 851/851 expanded, meaning built upon. So again, some things to think about. Actually, let me go back to another thought, which is about partners. You know, even in the pandemic and even with county and other finances tight, there may be opportunities with partnering with grants. So there may be, again, out of the box thinking where we might find a partner. There might be, even through the county, with an external grant that they become a partner with. So that funding needs to be spent by that outside funder. So again, some ways of getting to where we want to get, again, for the best interest of our community.
Okay, so it's just the three of us now. Marianne had to drop off too, but we're not voting.
We're not voting. It's a good discussion.
So,
it's a helpful.
yeah,
I'm glad we're doing this.
So I guess, Brian, the main thing you needed for us today, and I'm not ending the conversation, I just want to make sure that we've recapped everything that we needed to accomplish for your budget purposes. So we know that is something that you do not need anything else from us with regards to your budget. Is that accurate for right now?
For the budget, I know we've got a capital commitment spending freeze through July 1. I'll probably just expend it budget-wise all the way through 2021. We'll have a buildup. So no, I don't need that. But I think what we will then need is, I think we need to say go, no go on attacking this so we can start pulling the stuff together, because we're going to get a million questions. So that's where I'm at.
I think that here's my next question, and this is something for the broader discussion, is do we want to actually within the budget do long-term, short-term savings? I think that's something that the budget can, that our finance committee, how do we want to allocate our funds? Do we want to do, we want to save for a community center? We need this amount. So go ahead, Brian, you were going to comment on that.
Yeah, because you remember right here at the top on the sheet on the paper, we've got to do a budget for 2021, 22, and 23. So while we've got a freeze in 21, when we talk about capital commitments in 22 and 23, what might our unfreeze look like? So we're going to be forced, I think, as a board to have a conversation between now and October when we publish. So that's where you were headed. That's really where I'm thinking we've got to start saying small items or big items.
But as we think about budget for 22 and 23, would it be sufficient? That's the question. Is it sufficient to say capital improvements? Or do we just? I don't think you need to specify what they are. I think you need to specify the dollar amount in which you are reserving. Correct, Brian?
Yeah, I think you could literally handle it like such. I think you could literally say, and we were going to take the capital funding, we were going to anticipate Island Village and say, okay, over the next 6 years, 7 years, whatever we learn about Island Village, this is how it's going to aggregate. And I think we could say, we've reflected no expenditures. Here's how the fund is building up. And here is how the board is thinking about prioritizing and attacking the work we've got going on. I think we could lay it out like that, and I think it would be perfectly fine.
Okay. I will, because this is a posted meeting, I would like to open it up for public comment. That's why we have them here. So I wanted to make sure that the board at least has discussed what they needed to before opening it up to public comment. Again, yeah, go ahead, David.
No, I was just saying one last thing, and just this is a repeat. If you're part of what you're looking for is some action steps out of this discussion today. So one action step, and I see that Mike is or was on the phone, is just looking at other spaces around town where some of these smaller items might, it's kind of like an assessment of assets. Might croquet courts. I mean, look at where we used to have soccer before we had the CCFC, and look at, and my North Village residents will hate me, but we have those open fields that have benches. Might that be a place? So as we do the assessment and we say, hey, to redo this might, as we get to after the freeze, that would only cost 25 grand or 10 grand to fix up. Fine, let's learn some, just, it's a scan of our environments. It's a scan of what other assets might be there. So that's kind of like a action step that can go parallel to asking committees.
And I do think that that's something that that management has done. So I think that those types of assessments should be easily grabbed and referenced back, because I do know at one point in time, at least I know when I was on the board, that was a conversation. So
good.
I know it's in there somewhere.
Pulling some things, maybe some things in the records that Mike and Neil, Susan can find. That's good. That's good. Thank you.
So Brian, there was a specific question that I think is important. Brian, can you please, thank you, Joseph. Brian, can you please speak to debt? If CROA can afford a loan, are interest rates favorable for the immediate future over 5 years from now?
The answer is probably yes. For CROA to issue debt, we have to go to the residents and spell it out and get approval and stuff like that, which forces again to we have to actually do the work that's on these 2 pages so that we could actually lay out a plan. One of the most efficient ways to do debt would be a funding bond issuance in concert with CCDD. Gary Moyer and I have spoken about that before. There are certain rules and limitations around that. I could follow up with Gary Moyer on those. So it's worth having that conversation again.
That's a good point. Thank you. So on that note, is there anybody else in here? Okay. On that note, I'll open it up for public comment. Again, 3 minutes, no more than 3 minutes. And my timekeeper, David, thank you very much. You can raise your hand, you can signal, you can try and chime in and unmute yourself. Public comment. Am I missing anybody? Going.
Mike Jackson,
I see. Mike, I see you there. There you go, Mike. Go ahead.
Nobody's going to say anything, so I thought I'd just recap what I've heard, or maybe a process here. So I think it's been good discussion. Brian's asking, how do we attack this? And he's looking for some direction for the finance committee and so on. And David, you commented that maybe we ought to look at 2 buckets. And I think bucketing it is probably a good idea. When I hear this, I think you've got the community center that obviously needs to be developed, what that's going to be. I think here's the work you have to do. Community center, that's got to be developed. Secondly, at the same time, I think Lakeside should be evaluated, because I think those run hand in hand. So in that bucket, I think you got those 2 items that really deal with real estate. And then the third one in that bucket is Stetson. And I think, we've had plenty of discussions, as Brian indicated, and it continues. I think we can make a real easy decision on rent if it gets to the right price. We can always make that decision, and it's going to continue to go down as time progresses. The question on debt was real appropriate, and we did look at this once before to some extent. I think we need to prepare a debt option that if this building would come back to the marketplace, if the investors would get tired of it and just want to exit it because they have no productive income out of it whatsoever at this point, and I don't think the prospects are good. So I think the place we have to be prepared for is a debt option to buy it if it got to the right price, because it'd just be too cheap to pass on. I don't know what that price is. It's a 30,000 square foot building. It could go for $3 million at $100 a foot. That'd be pretty attractive. And then before I run out of time, in the other bucket, or the other side I think that we should be working on is a Civic Corridor. We do own that property. It's there. That's likely going to house a lot of small projects or other type of projects. And I think we just got to spend time on getting that land ready and making it productive. We're not going to just let it sit there. So we've got to figure that out. So I think there's a lot of activity that's got to be spent there in terms of how do we do that in an efficient and economical fashion to make it productive and useful. So those are, I think, tacking it, Brian, to your question, what I heard, I think that's my recommendation. That's what I would see in terms of an approach forward. So that's it.
Mike, you got
Thank you very
another,
much.
Mike, you got another minute. Go for it.
I'll take questions.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate your insight.
Oh, yeah, Eileen Barr.
Yep, you're all set,
Okay.
Eileen.
Eileen Barr, 1138 Mosaic Drive. Jerry and I are away. We rented a house for a week, so we missed some of the meeting, but I think we really got most of it. I just want to say that I really appreciate it. Quite honestly, if you start planning now, because this is a long process, we might be able to sort of hit the sweet spot coming back out of COVID, out of whatever, to, as you say, be able and prepared to move on good opportunities as they come up. I do really like the idea, David's idea, of perhaps finding partners, maybe even from a gym, from Advent Health. They might be interested in having a quote wellness center right in Celebration. For them, it's a way to find patients and new people for the hospital. Same with the performing arts. So anyway, I just, this was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen. And yes, multi-purpose is a key word from planning. I would agree with you, Joseph. Any other comments from the public at large? I see no hands. I see no waving.
Steve,
Oh, there you go. Go ahead,
hand.
Steve. Yep, go ahead, Steve. You're on mute.
Yeah, thank
There you
you.
go.
Just a question regarding the Civic Corridor. There was brought up that there's a $800,000 number associated with doing drainage and repair of that facility to get it ready to build anything useful out there. We've already paid quite a bit of money to build the athletic fields and also build a dog park out there. Is the lack of the drainage and preparation, was that an oversight in the building? Was it intentional? Was it something that was basically not done properly? Why is there that problem associated with that facility? We're talking about pickleball courts, which is a fairly small amount of square footage, and it's being burdened with like an $800,000 repair of the drainage facility. So I'm just wondering if that's something that should be burdened on that project, or is it something that should go back to the original contractor? Or I'm not sure how this happened. Go ahead, Brian. I'll give up.
You're on mute.
That is an outstanding question, and that's not meant to be a flippant answer. That is meant to be a true answer. When Steve Waring and I got the report from the contractor, we had a small heart attack. And then we looked, this is all going to be half-truths that I'm going to give you. You know, it gets to, okay, everything gets dumped in these Lot B and Lot D because they were getting the dog park ready and they were getting the Civic Corridor ready, and you make it work, and then all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're saying, now we've got the rest of the corridor. I think, just like the athletic fields did not anticipate the reserve requirements and the run rate requirements and stuff like that, I don't think we probably had a complete civic corridor plan, so that when we were mapping it out with drainage and with retention ponds and everything, that we thought about the long-term utilization of each piece of space. And where we're really at today is we need to do an assessment of the whole civic corridor and the 2 pieces of land that are left. For example, we got a quote, and just to take lot D, which is the one between the athletic fields there, they thought it would cost $75,000 to $80,000 to have an engineer and everything come in and just evaluate the land fully and everything, and what would it do to get it ready and stuff like that. I honestly believe we're going to have to pay a engineer, an architect, come in and actually look at lot B and lot D together, along with all the drainage and all the retention pond stuff to be fully utilized. Was it thought about in the past? No. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions, past boards and crap like that. It's just the reality of what we have found, we inherited, and that's where we're at. And it's unfortunate, but it's true.
And,
Yeah,
and Steve, just really quick to add on to that, Steve, the comment that you had asked specifically is, should the project, right, so whether it be pickleball or anything else that we were to develop on that particular lot, should it be tagged to that particular project, or should it just be that's your due diligence in order to make sure that you can do something on that lot? I know when I was on the board before, when we were talking about the dog park and going through all of that, it was a board decision at that point in time that no, it shouldn't be attributable to that particular project, right? The $800,000 should not be attributed to the dog park, because that's just the cost it is to prep for the land. As your board moves forward, every board will take a different look at that particular property, right? So being on the board at the time for the dog park, we said it was a $400,000 project to do the dog park. Well, now it's turned into an $800,000 project. So it adds, because depending upon who your board is, as a board member, you're always going to want that project that you just planned to cost the least amount possible. So I think it's important that, yes, you're correct, it needs to be the prep for the property, but unfortunately, wherever you end up putting on there, it gets linked to whatever is that group, that lot. Go ahead, Brian.
And I'd like to follow up here. We spent a lot of time last year. Von Roberts was extremely diligent in going through many areas to look at where could we put pickleball as an example, where could we put croquet as an example. I don't think there's only so much space, and we certainly have exhausted most of the space. David said, let's do a re-inventory, but we inventoried the daylights out of it all last year. The reason we went to lot B is because we said it's actually a logical place to put it when you look at how different things are utilized. So I really think which is why you kind of get back to your 851, because we own a piece of undeveloped land on Celebration Boulevard. But I have been told by some pretty responsible people that probably it would take a couple of $1 million to get that land cleared, stable, and anything if we ever wanted to build on it. And that's a lot of money, which is why we're really, when we're sitting here and we're talking about Stetson and we're talking about Lot B and D and we're talking about 851 refurbishment, it's because we did spend a lot of time last year really looking at what are our options. And we've got it down to, here are the 3 or 4 places we can really do things.
Yeah, to get back to Vanessa's point, I'm less concerned about where the $800,000 is burdened on one particular project. In fact, of looking back and saying, well, we built a road down there, which is a tremendous amount of square footage. If you look at the amount that were done for the road, you look at the building that was built down there, you look at the dog park, you look at the library, you look at the athletic fields, and now we're talking about something that's a relatively minuscule amount of impervious cover for pickleball courts. And we now have to do all this major re-engineering of the drainage system. The question is, when it was originally done, did the contractor that did it, did he make a mistake when he did it? Did he not do it properly?
Actually,
I think somebody should look at that. And we spent a lot of money on this athletic field. So, I mean, that was a tremendous expenditure. You think somebody should go back and say, well, you're building Civic Corridor, you built the road down there to the athletic fields, you built the building down there that's used for the CDD that's down there. Why why wasn't any of this taken into account for a very small amount of square footage to build a pickleball courts? We're now talking $800,000 in drainage and stuff that has to be done, where you would think that would be, in the overall scope, I think it's probably less than 5% of the total coverage in the whole area. I'm just guessing, but it seems relatively small. And to say, well, gee, somebody in the original contract that built it shouldn't have considered this, or shouldn't have been part of the contract, and it wasn't an oversight. Should someone look back just from a due diligence standpoint and making sure that we got what we paid for when we paid for the civic corridors?
I'm going to address two things really quick. First of all, when the Civic Corridor was originally planned, the golf course was actually one of the properties that the board at the time, and I was on the board, the golf course, which is lot D, which, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's D.
So,
it's Leonard Tim did
yeah.
that deal. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So lot D. So I was on the board at the time, and when we were planning the Civic Corridor, that particular area was owned by the golf course. We wanted to take that over because we weren't sure what was going to happen. Right? When you were actually developing it, where were we going to need that land? So unfortunately, when we've done it, it's been piecemealed. We didn't have the golf course area. And I don't know that it was. I don't believe it was a fault of the engineers. I believe it was the timing as it was going. And it may have been time, I mean, honestly, I'll put it back on the board. It may have been the board's fault because we did not plan it from day one. Here's our lot. How do we want to do it? You know, start here, we're going to plan forward. We didn't do that. Was it because it was a lack of guidance? I don't know. But the reality is, this is where we're at. We didn't have all the property together when we actually were doing our planning. We planned from the library out. We were looking at doing fields. The only area we could do fields was down at the end. So I think that's inherent in the changing of the board as to where the board priorities are. That's my 2 cents. Then I'll open up to other board members, or Steve, if you have more comments.
Well, I mean, if we're referring to the pickleball courts aren't going on D, they're going on B. That was a recommendation, which is closer, which is right adjacent to the dog park, if I recall.
Correct.
So that I don't know if that was part of the deal when you bought it from the golf course or not. I thought it was just D, but I could be mistaken. But
I was just referring more to the draining and how everything drained together with my point.
Right. I mean, if B was there, and it just seems like such a small, minuscule amount of impervious cover that you're adding with the pickleball courts relative to the building of all the other things that are out there. It seems, I just think someone should take a look at it and see, did we get what we paid for? Is this did they do the job correctly?
So to me, when the land was TCC's land, and I'm not sure that we paid for it initially.
We did not.
Was it not a gift? It was a gift, and it was in a parcel to the golf course, a parcel to CDD, and a largest parcel to CROA. And then, Vanessa, as you said, it was a couple of years ago, we decided to buy the golf course parcel so that we could have that for future development. I think when the whole thing was conceptualized, you know, and from CROA's perspective, it's like, let's take this nearest parcel and build the dog park. We'll figure out the rest later. And then came the CCFC, you know, the ball fields, and then we bought the park from the golf carts. So, but I don't think there was a long-term plan about how the whole Civic Corridor would be built out. Yes. So that was not part of, I don't think that was part of a larger plan.
I agree with that statement. The other thing that matters is when you build pickleball and, you know, a parking lot and stuff was talked about, all of a sudden now you're doing asphalt-like things. So instead of rain going immediately into the ground, it is immediately draining at the speed it rains in Florida right into the ditches and everything. So as our utilization of the Civic Corridor has evolved into more and more things, it creates a completely different use pattern than just having natural Florida sand where the rain sinks into it.
Yeah, and I know that
I would say just like with our properties, right? You're supposed to have so much impervious space,
right?
And that it falls in line with the same thing.
You know, and I know there's been discussion in the past many times about build a building, build a community center on the Civic Corridor. I mean, that's not taken much traction, but hasn't got much traction, but that has been, you know, hey, we have space, let's build it there.
And I suspect if you did that, you would find out that the land preparation cost would be enormous.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And then we haven't even attended to parking.
So I'm going to,
Joseph has
Steve,
raised his hand.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, I was just going to
Okay.
make a point real quick.
All right, sorry.
Steve, are we all set with that? Because we do have a couple more questions and I'd like to finish in 5 minutes.
Yeah, and that's fine, but I still think someone should look at it and see, make sure what was done originally was done properly. I still think the
Got it.
amount of impervious space that was already put out there was tremendous relative to what we're talking about.
Got it. Thank you. We'll make sure we follow up on that. I do appreciate that. Thanks, Steve. I thought I just saw Joseph. Was it Joseph that your hand was?
Joseph's hand was up.
Okay, go ahead, Joseph. You're on mute.
Just a point
There
of
you
just a point of history for Steve and for everyone. I think it's important that we mention it. Is that was never intended for any type of structural buildings back there at all. It was originally an extension of Celebration Boulevard to connect to Celebration Avenue. The Disney company just felt it was going to be too expensive to build anything and build that connector. And that was one of the reasons that the land was turned over to us. So that expense didn't go away. We just couldn't afford, as a CROA board, as we've been talking, for what was really necessary to develop that whole section into something that can be utilized for a development or buildings per se. So that's just an important history note. But I mean, even Disney was worried about the cost that was back there to make that connector.
Thank you, Joseph. That's true. And I think even when you're building a property, right? If you want to, you can do things that work with the land, and it costs less. As soon as you have to do things and make the land do what it was not intended to do, your costs increase. So just like with building a house. So point taken. Thank you, Joseph. So on that note, we got enough time for one more question. If we have any resident comments. Anyone? Okay. So on that note, board, Brian, do you want to, how do you want to handle the next step to make sure that we don't get stalled?
Okay, we have a board meeting coming up in 2 weeks, week and a half, whatever it is. Why don't we agree? I think what we've done is we've agreed materially in concept with what's going on here. Why don't we create an action item for that board meeting that could lead to a motion or two at that board meeting? Because I think I like the idea of using the committees. I think, you know, we ought to say we want to understand B and D and what the heck, what it would take to make that land usable and a couple other things. So if we can, that buys us time, and I'll be happy to take the lead from a board perspective of kind of putting together, you know, the action item overview, a page leading to a motion or two, if that's okay.
That would be perfect. David, are you good with that?
Yeah, and might that page be a shorter page than the two? No. No, is it?
Yes, it will.
Is it
Yes.
basically
Yeah,
a?
I write 2 pages a day, write 6.
It will be shorter, right, Brian?
No, but it's using a lot of what we have here, and you have all of my comments too written, just outlining what the opportunity and what the questions are.
It'll be 1 page that summarizes 2 or 3 action points that we need.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
Good. Sounds good.
Thank you very much. And thank you all, the residents that have joined.
One
in
more
for us.
thing, Vanessa.
Go ahead, Susan. Go ahead.
Yes, we need to schedule the board budget workshop at as late as Friday, October the 3rd.
I had proposed September 25th. Is that a good date, bad date?
Works for me.
I thought
Friday, September 25th.
Yes, I won't be able to be there that day, but it works fine. I don't have to be there. I can always listen to it.
What was the date you were looking at?
Well, it just needs to be before October 3rd or October 2nd. I gave you the wrong date, or I wrote the wrong date down.
in order to be able to get in the board packet, because we've got to finalize everything for the board packet after that.
Let's give us some wiggle room so that we don't push too hard. I mean, to think about, to get it into the board packet, what if we needed a second or a half-day follow-on or something? So
I was gonna say, I really like the 25th because these Zoom meetings are positive and they're negative. You know, the positive of getting everybody in a room is you can have the interactions, the sidebars. You have this, I guarantee you're gonna get a second call.
yeah. So the 20, I would argue whatever our first meeting is, or whatever our meeting is, no later than the 25th.
Why don't we, Vanessa, maybe we should do September 25th and October 2nd. And on October 2nd, if we only need a half hour or we don't need it, we can always cancel it. But then we got both of them on a calendar.
But I think that she needs, Susan, you need it before the
That's
second,
fine.
correct? Because
No, that
would
works.
that work?
No. By the 2nd
Okay.
will be fine. And then I'll have a week to get everything finalized for the board packet.
So on
Perfect.
September 25th, we'll have the first meeting. On October 2nd will be any follow-up items that lead to Susan being able to get everything done by October 9th. The question.
Is that reasonable?
I'm sorry.
Susan, does that work?
Absolutely.
And 25th is
Okay.
all day, or what is that?
I was gonna say, that's the next question. September 25th starts when and ends when? I mean, I don't care if we start at 10, but it's not gonna be done in an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Typically, these have
I
been
put
all-day
down
meetings.
for
These have been
4
all-day.
hours.
Okay.
4 hours?
Yeah,
Sure, that's fine.
I
We'll just
had
send-
asked Patrick for 4 hours,
Start at
let's do
9.
that.
but it can be all day.
Do we want to start at 9, board?
That's fine. Start at 9 and try to be done by 1.
Yeah, let's block out 9 to 2. If we get done early, God bless it, we'll just shut down the meeting. And then I think probably on the 2nd, you know, that follow-up meeting could be at 10 to noon and we'd be done, I think, in 2 hours. Because I think that's any hanging items type meeting.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
Thank you, Susan.
Susan,
You're
you'll have
welcome.
the invitation sent out then?
Yes, we'll have the invitation sent out
9 to 2, and then 10, maybe 10 to 12 on the
to 12
second.
on
On the 2nd.
on Friday the 2nd.
Yeah,
Yes.
perfect.
So on that note, Susan, did you have everything else that you needed from us?
I have everything I need and more.
I bet you do. Sorry. And
It's fine.
Neil, do you have anything that you needed from us? I think he's muted.
Is Neil?
I'm guessing.
He's,
that. I know he's
he's
in there.
probably on mute.
Yeah,
But
he's
I
on
will
mute. That's
tell
okay.
you, we'll let you know if we need anything else. How about that?
Perfect.
Hey,
Thank
Vanessa?
you so much. Yes.
Oh, there
Sorry,
he is.
I am here. It just my phone decides to go to sleep like if I don't do anything, and so I have to like log back into my phone to actually talk. No, I'm good. And yes, I second Brian's comments of hour and a half, 2 hours on enough. And again, I'm going to reiterate, I would like an opportunity, if possible, for at least some of us to get into a room with CDC guidelines. It's so much harder on Zoom when we're talking budgets and numbers and, you know, everybody feeling like they're part of the conversation. So just throwing it out there.
Got it. Thank you. We can do a hybrid. I think by then we'll start doing a blended anyway, depending upon CDC guidelines. But I think that to your point, I think we're going to try to shoot for that. As a side note, we only have 3 of us on here, but Neil, if we could on the next agenda, or Susan on the next agenda, if we could add the conversation of volleyball courts to our list. I did send off a couple of items to the board last evening that was sent to me from a resident regarding some concerns. I would highly encourage that social distancing continue. More importantly, please don't gather on the sidewalks. It's just counterproductive, and it makes people that are trying to socially distance, it makes it really hard because that means they have to walk into the street. So if we could please, just between now and when we actually vote on it next week, could we please be just a little more respectful of those around you that are trying to social distance? On that note, any other comments from the board?
So we went to an every other week schedule. So the other week is next week. This was an add-on to our every other week schedule. So just to be clear.
Correct.
Yes.
Just
Correct.
to be, okay, good. Perfect.
So-
Perfect.
So next week was my comment for, that's when it'll
Yes.
go on the agenda for next
Yes.
week. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
If we can vote, since
We can still adjourn. We don't need it.
I'll motion to adjourn just so we can do it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, residents, for joining in.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
a
Thank
good
you for
one.
running us.
Have a good day. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye-bye.